Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 2 of my 2024 Valentine Card Series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Dear Santa. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Sweet Talk 6x8 pad. So I'm going to tear off the sheet that I'm going to use as my color inspiration and tuck that under my cardstock panel. And I will be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with the dog, and I'm going to pull out a range of brown tones for him. I'm using E50, E51, and E53 for the main part of the body. Starting with the E53, I'm going to lay in some shadows down his backside, also a little bit on his head and on the backs of his legs. And I'm putting a little bit on the top of his muzzle as well to create a bit of shadow to just emphasize the protrusion. And then I'm going to start blending that out with the E51. Then I'll come in with my lightest shade, the E50, and soften that up. I did leave a little bit of white space on the bottom of his muzzle and the tip of his tail on my initial layer. I am going to come in with a second layer on him though, because I just wanted to increase that saturation a bit without going darker. I wanted to save those darker colors for the contrast. So I'm just going right over the shading that I've already done. And then this time when I come in with my lightest shade, the E50, I'm actually going to fill in all of his body, including the rest of his muzzle and the tip of his tail. Then for some contrast, I'm going to use the darker tones there. I'm going to use E53, E55, and E57, starting with the E57 at the top of the ear and blending down toward the bottom with the E55 and then the E53. I'm also going to do a little ring around his eye, a patch down his back, and a smaller patch on his little leg there, and also his tail I'm going to color in this darker brown combo. So once I have that down with the E57, I'm going to start blending out with the E55, and then I'll go in with the E53, which is going to soften that into the rest of his fur tone and just make it look really nice and natural. While I have these brown tones out, I'm also going to do the pole that my mailbox is standing on. And I'm starting with my darkest shade, the E57 for that. I did a little shadow down the right hand side, also under the mailbox itself and a little bit under the bow. And then I did draw in some little wood grain texture just to add a bit of definition and interest to that pole. And then I'm blending that out with the E55 and the E53. I did feel like we lost a little bit of that definition though, so I'm going to go back in with my E57 and add a bit of that back in. And it doesn't matter if it gets layered right over what some of the other texture left, because wood grain has lots of different tones to it, and the grain can be a little bit deeper or not so deep, so I think it's all good. Next I'm going to work on my cat, and I wanted to pull out that kind of peachy orange floral that is in the pattern paper. So I'm using YR00, YR01, YR02, and YR04. I'm starting with the YR04 and doing some shading with that so that I can make a nice little orange tabby cat. And then I'm going to start blending out with the YR04. Now at first there was a part at the top right of his head that I thought was the side of his ear. On closer inspection it turns out that it is the mouse's other foot. So I am going to go back and fix that in just a minute, but at first I thought that it was part of the cat, so that's why I colored it in the orange tones. So once I had the YR02 laid in, I blended out with the YR01, And then I'm coming in with the YR00 and bringing that forward even further. I actually wanted to leave a little bit of white on him, have a little white belly and white muzzle, some white socks on his feet. But to transition that into the white, I decided to go even lighter, bringing in YR000. And now I'm going to bring in my colorless blender to push that orange out of that mouse's foot. As it starts to be revealed again, you can see that it is his foot. And then I also did just kind of clean up around the edges of the white part of my cat, just to make those a little bit cleaner, since some of the orange shades had kind of seeped in farther than I wanted them to go. And then once I let that dry for maybe a minute, I'm going to come in with my YR04 and add some little tiger stripes. So I did 3 on the top of the head and then 2 coming in from the side. I also added some on the legs, and I'm going to come up the back of the little kitty as well. Just doing kind of long, skinny triangles to give him a little bit of interest, just like the dog has some interest with his little spots. I thought it would be fun to give him a little pattern as well. And then I'm going to move on to my mouse, and this time I'm trying to bring out some super pale, kind of peachy pink shades. And so I'm going to do a white mouse, but I wanted him to be more of like a peachy cream tone. I'm using E000, E00, and E02. Starting with the E02 and laying in my shadows, I also put a layer of that on his tail, which I will add to in just a bit, but that was kind of like a base layer. Blending out the E02 with the E00, and then coming in with the E triple, and also leaving a little bit of white space on him. Next, I'm going to bring in some pink tones. I'm going to use RV10 and RV11. I'm going to give all of these critters some rosy cheeks, and then also color the insides of the ears of my cat and my mouse, and also add a layer of that pink to the mouse's tail. I'll give my little bird a rosy cheek and also a pink breast. So I use the RV11 first and then blend it out with the RV10 where it was needed. And I did go back and add a little extra of the RV11 on the kitty because I really wanted it to show up on his darker color. Then I added in RV13 to this combo, and this is where I made a little bit of a mistake, although I was able to fix it. I know that my RV13 has always been a leaky marker, so I usually pull off both caps to equalize the pressure in the barrel, and then I usually don't have any issues. I did not do that this time, and so my marker is going to leak right there on my little bird's belly. So I'm going to leave that to dry. I did not panic. This is something that happens, and usually you can fix it, although red and pinks can be a bit more difficult, especially the darker pinks. The lighter pinks are not so bad. But I'm just going to leave it to dry. No panic. And I'm going to move on. So I'm going to bring in RV14 and RV17 as well. And I'm going to keep using that RV13 marker. And I'm going to do the little trio of hearts at the top, and then I'll also do another one of the envelopes using the RV17 down at the bottom, and then also a little bit at the bottom of the flap. And then I'm going to blend that out with the RV14 and then bring in my RV13, which is not giving me any issues anymore now that both caps are off. But then once that has dried, I'll bring in my colorless blender and start to push that color back. With lighter colors, sometimes it only takes one application, but since this is a bright pink, it did take a couple of tries, but you just have to let it dry in between the layers and then come back to it. So I'm moving on to my mailbox, and I decided to go with black to tie in those tiny little leaves next to the flowers, which are black on that pattern paper. So I'm going to bring in C3, C5, C7, and C9, And I'm starting with the C9 and doing a little bit of a shadow down at the bottom of the mailbox, and then right at the top underneath that snow, which would also be casting a shadow. Next, I was meant to bring in the C7 to begin to blend that out, but I didn't realize that I had actually grabbed the C5. It actually worked pretty well blending out the C9, so I just continued using it. It wasn't until I kind of finished and went to reach for the next shade down, right there you can kind of see me pause. That was when I realized that I had skipped the C7 entirely, but I just decided to go with it, and so now I'm coming in with the C3 and just pulling that color towards the center. I'm making sure to scrub over the edge of that C5 so that I get a smooth transition. Although because I skipped the C7, it wasn't quite as smooth as I would like. So I am going to go back with a little bit more of that C5. I didn't bother going in with the C7, but I went back to my C5 and just dragged that color toward the center one more time, and then went over the edge of that with the C3 until I was happier with how that was looking. And then for the inside of the mailbox, I decided to go just slightly lighter. Sometimes metal can have like a different tone on the opposite side, and that's what I wanted to go for. So on the inside, I'm actually starting with the C5, and I'm doing a little shadow on the inside and then also a little shadow on the door that is hanging down. And then I'm going to blend that out with the C3 and finish with the C1. So it's just a little bit lighter, but I think it gives it a nice bit of contrast, so while still matching nicely. I went back to my colorless blender because I went outside of the lines a tiny bit there, and then I'm going to do a second application of pushing that pink back into the bird's breast. I'm going to move on to my snow using BG quadruple 0, BG 10, and BG 11 to give that a bit of a frosty glow. I'm just going to start at the top with the BG 11 and then blend that out with the BG 10 and add a little bit of the BG quadruple 0 to just blend that into the white space, because I'm going to leave a little bit of white for an extra highlight. And then I'm going to keep the darkest two shades there and add in BG 13 to do my little bird, using the BG 13 for my shadows on the tail and the edge of the wing and the back of the head, and then blending out with the BG 11 and then a little bit of BG 10 on the face. Next, I'm going to pull in some red tones to match the red floral in that pattern paper. But I decided not to go with my typical favorite red combo because it has more of a coral warm undertone, and the pinks that I've been using so far are more cool toned. So I decided to use R35, R37, and R39. It's slightly more of a cranberry red, but I think it suits the color combo really nicely. I did one of the stamps on the envelopes, another envelope, and then I'm going to do the flag on the mailbox, just starting with that R39, blending out with the R37, and then I'll use the R35 for a little bit of a highlight. I decided not to do a red bow on the mailbox because red, even though it is also associated with Valentine's Day, is also a very traditional Christmas color. And since this was already a Christmas stamp set and I was using it for a Valentine card, I just wanted to not go in the way that might be expected for a Christmas card. So I brought in R30 and R32 and kept the R35 and did my last envelope with that combo. And then I'll also do the bow on the mailbox with these tones. Now, the R32 and the R30 are quite far apart. They're a little bit difficult to blend. And to be honest, the R32 and the R35 don't blend super easy as well. It's easier in smaller areas, but on a larger image, you can really see that rougher transition between the tones. So I did do the tip-to-tip technique on these little transition areas on both of these images just to help with the blend a bit more, because otherwise that R30 was just really pushing that R32 back, and you could kind of see like it was just taking up most of the image. So I'm going to use the R32 to pick up a little bit of the R35 and just soften the transition areas, and then go back over them with a little bit more of the R30 just to make everything nice and smooth. And then I'll grab my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and get that going off to the side until it's flowing nicely. And I'll go over the eyes of all of my critters to make them nice and bright and shiny again. This is just an extra step, but it really does make a huge difference in my opinion. And then I will trim these images out with their matching dies. Next, I'm going to go back to my Sweet Talk pattern paper pad from Simple Stories and pull out this cloud print that I'm going to use as my background. I'm also going to take the original print that we used for our Copic color combos and trim that out using the Hello Bluebird postage frame die. So I'm just going to be using the frame for this particular card. I've also die cut an additional frame out of plain white cardstock, and I just wanted to show you like the clouds on that pattern paper are definitely not a pure white. So when I was choosing my cardstock for my snow, I decided to go with Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock because it's more of an off-white and matched better with the clouds on that pattern paper. I'm going to trim that down with one of the Hello Bluebird Hill and Dale dies, and then I'm going to glue the pattern paper frame to the white cardstock frame just to give that a bit more stability, because I want to pop it up with some foam tape and I just wanted it to be more strong and durable. So I just added a bit of liquid glue to the back of the pattern paper, and then I'm just making sure to line that up very carefully because this glue does dry really quick. So I want to make sure that I have it adjusted so that you can't see any of that white cardstock showing through. And I'm going to do the same thing with the pattern paper for the background, gluing it to a piece of plain white cardstock to give it a bit more stability. And also because that scrap of cloud print paper was a little bit short, that also just makes it kind of one unit once again, once I glue the snowdrift over top. Then I took my same shades that I used for the snow on the images and added a little bit of that to the top of the snowdrift just to incorporate it a little bit better with the images. So I started with the BG11 and then blended out with the BG10 and then used the BG quadruple zero. And I also used a little bit of the colorless blender just to soften the edge of that BG quadruple zero into the rest of that cardstock. Then I can pop that panel into my MISTI so I can stamp my sentiment. I'm going to use the one that says Sending Paper Hugs, and I'm stamping that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. So I'm using my Twiddler's Nook Pressure Pal to get a nice impression, and I am going to stamp that down twice like I always do to make sure it's nice and bold. And then I can set that aside to dry. And in the meantime, I'll stamp on the inside of my card base. I'm using MFT's Snow Cone cardstock, and I'm stamping in Lawn Fawn Merman ink. And I just did the little bird and one of the envelopes and the special delivery stamp set. So this card is not going to be glaringly Valentine's Day, but I did that on purpose because if I end up not sending this out on time for Valentine's Day or not needing as many cards for Valentine's Day, I still have this in my stash that I can send to somebody for an anniversary or just any kind of general love theme. but I still think it works as a Valentine's Day card if you need it to. You can always stamp an additional Happy Valentine's Day underneath on the inside, or write that in your greeting. So I cut down thin strips of foam tape and popped up that frame over the background like I mentioned, and then I'm gluing that whole piece to the front of my card, and that pattern paper matches that snow cone cardstock perfectly. Then I'm going to bring in my images, and I've added some foam tape to the back of most of those as well. So I'm going to peel off the release papers for the largest two images before I add either one of them, because I want to center them on the card together, because I want to have them overlapping just a little bit. So I'm just going to peel off those release papers, and then once I have that done, I'm going to line up those images in the center together. Just make sure that I have the right amount of space on all sides, because I still have the little bird that is going to sit on top of the mailbox. I have the envelopes that are going below the mailbox. So I just want to make sure I have everything placed just where I want it. Then I can add that little bird like I mentioned, and thankfully he fit just inside that frame perfectly. And then I have the 3 little envelopes that I'm going to scatter down at the bottom. I did not add foam tape to those yet because I knew part of the image was going to overlap some of the images that were already popped up, so I just needed to add a little bit of foam tape as needed. So just in case you missed it, the first part of this video was actually a plan with me video where I showed you guys how I go through my process of figuring out a card idea and laying it all out, choosing my supplies. I went through everything that I typically do, from having no idea whatsoever what kind of card to make to having a completed card concept. So if you missed that video and that sounds like something that would be interesting to you, definitely check that out. I actually now have a Plan a Card with Me playlist where you can see all of the videos I've done in this series. There's only been a couple so far, but I definitely want to do a lot more in the future because you guys seem to really enjoy them. So it took a little bit of trial and error to get those 3 envelopes placed just right, because I did not want to cover up any part of the sentiment. I wanted to make sure that you were able to read that legibly. But then I just added the trio of tiny hearts up between the mouse and the little bluebird. So I have those popped up on foam tape as well. And I'm just adjusting those until I have them how I want them. And then, of course, I decided that I wanted to have a little bit of glitter on this card, as usual. So I pulled in my favorite Stardust Stickles and added some of that to the bow that is on the mailbox. Also to the trio of hearts and to the 2 stamps on the envelopes, just a touch of that. And then the snowdrift, I added a bit to that as well. So that is going to finish off this card. I'm going to lift that up so you can see all of the detail and hopefully catch some of that sparkle and shine. I'll give you another peek at the inside as well. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one, seeing me stretch my stamps and use a Christmas stamp set for a Valentine card. If that's something that you do enjoy, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to read your feedback. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and make sure you have your notifications turned on if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here is day 2 of the previous 2 years of Valentine Card Series. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.